Welcome to the Litigation War Room, where you will hear great stories and great insights to raise your litigation game and win more cases. Here's your host, litigation attorney, Maxwell Goss.
Suzanne Lucas, welcome to the Litigation War Room.
Thank you. I'm a little scared to be here.
Suzanne, you are known as the evil HR lady. You do a training program called Improv Your HR. You write insightful articles for Forbes and other publications. And you're a great follow on LinkedIn. You're one of the few people I go out of my way to read on LinkedIn. You're consistently informative, entertaining, and somehow you manage to pull both of those things off at the same time. So I'm just thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Oh, you're my favorite now.
Well, good. That was the point. We're going to cover a lot of territory today. AI recruiting, non-competes, do's and don'ts for employers. But first, I want to be sure to say what you emphasize to me, Suzanne, which is that you are not a lawyer, and you don't even play one on TV. So listeners, don't take any legal advice from Suzanne. Of course, you all know you shouldn't be taking legal advice from a podcast anyway. We're here to entertain and inform, and we're not your attorneys. Now, Suzanne, could you start by just telling us a bit about who you are and what you do?
I'm Suzanne Lucas. I'm better known as the evil HR lady. I do a bunch of things. I write about HR and business. I give keynote speeches about HR and business. I own a webinar company called HR Learns that just launched this week that does webinars along with Victoria Purser. We have some great ones coming up. And I do improvisational comedy, and I incorporate improv comedy into leadership. So that's kind of a lot of different things. I'm never bored.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, let's start with the improv. How do you incorporate improv into the HR training that you do?
So there's some really important principles of improv comedy. The first one is yes and, which is where you accept whatever your team members or whatever the audience throws at you and you build on that. You don't ever get to say no. When someone says, you're holding a cat, you can't say, no, I'm not holding a cat. You just are like, oh, okay, I'm holding a cat. And this turns out to be a really important leadership principle, that whatever problem comes your way, the first step is actually accepting it. So often we just spend so much time complaining and trying to wish things away. No, and I'm sure in law you get that. Okay, this is what happened. This is what the client did. Now let's build on that.
If only they hadn't done this. I wish that email didn't exist. I wish they hadn't said that stupid thing. If only they had taken my impeccable advice.
Exactly. And so you can spend a lot of time on that, and it doesn't do any good. So it's the same principle. So that's one of the big things. Another big thing is in improv, it's so off the wall, and you never know what the audience is going to say. You never know what your team member is going to say. It forces you to really listen. And so often we don't listen to other people. We think about what we're going to say next instead of listening. And so a lot of the training I do with improv comedy is teaching people how to listen to what is being said rather than thinking about what they're going to say next. And that alone makes you a much, much better leader. And then, of course, improv comedy teaches you to think on your feet. It teaches you to respond. It teaches you to speak with confidence. And so it's a really, really great tool if you want to develop yourself as a leader.
That's a really interesting angle, and those are some fabulous insights. That could be a whole episode unto itself, I'm sure. But I also have to ask you, Suzanne, why evil HR lady? Where did that come from?
Well, so let's say your boss calls you in for a meeting and you walk in, and sitting in the room is the HR person. How's that meeting going to go?
A chill runs down your spine as soon as the HR person walks in.
Exactly. Everybody knows how that's going, right? It comes from the idea of playing on people's negative attitudes towards HR. And when it started, I've been using the moniker since 2006, and it started because I wanted to write a blog but I was working in pharmaceuticals, which is a very conservative industry. And 2006 is really before social media and all that. And so I needed a pseudonym to write under. And I thought that kind of represents how people feel about HR. And it was one of those 30-second decisions that was a really, really great decision. It just really great marketing.
And the name stuck. It sums it all up. It expresses the light touch that you bring to these subjects, and it also expresses the expertise that you're slipping in alongside of it. As you know, I'm a litigation attorney. Our listeners are mostly attorneys who handle litigation matters in a variety of areas: employment, personal injury, criminal defense. I myself handle business and IP litigation, you name it. I know many listeners will be excited to hear from you because HR, human resources, it just seems to come up in lots of different contexts and is often an issue in different kinds of litigation. And I know you're not a lawyer, Suzanne, but the very nature of HR is such that you're interfacing with legal all the time.
Yeah, it really is a law-heavy kind of a role, and people don't realize how incredibly important that is. I mean, we're not attorneys. We don't act as attorneys. I am not an attorney, but I better darn well have a pretty darn good understanding of the law, and more importantly, I need to understand when I need to call an attorney. And that is a really critical skill to teach people. You don't have to know all of the ins and outs of everything. You don't. You can't as an HR person. You're too busy doing everything else. But you need to know what your limit is so that you can then pick up the phone and call your employment attorney to help you with it. Because
Mhm.
otherwise you get into huge trouble. And as I try to remind people, it's cheaper to pay for an hour of attorney time before things go bad than to pay for 100 hours of attorney time after it goes bad.
Ain't that the truth? You're a prolific writer, Suzanne. Now, like I mentioned before, you have a recent article that you wrote where you talk about some different employment scenarios. You could call it Stupid Things Bosses Say. It's really a great article. I'll put a link to it in our show notes. But let me get your take here on just a couple of the examples that you provided in that article. I'll read you a quote and you tell me what's wrong with it. One of those in there is, I took the guys out for a round of golf to celebrate our sales. The girls didn't want to come. Perfectly
Yeah.
innocent, innocuous comment. What if the girls don't want to come golfing, Suzanne?
Well, then they shouldn't
The
have
quote
to
unquote
golf
girls.
because, let's be honest, golfing is boring. It's just boring. But there's a whole bunch of things wrong with that. One is guys and girls are not equal. Guys are your equal. Girl is someone that is younger
Hmm.
and
So some
immature.
of it is that terminology of girls, right? Yeah.
So so referring to your female adult employees, because I assume this is not talking about your high school crew, which maybe I'll let you get away with it then. That first sets up this dichotomy of we're adults and you girls are children that need to
Hmm.
be, protected. And and the other thing is, did the female employees really not want to golf? Now this is kind of tough because if you and I were coworkers and you were like, "Hey, I'm going golfing. Do you want to come?" My answer would be no, right? No, I'm not interested in golfing.
Refer back to my prior comments about how boring
Yeah,
golf is, right?
it's
Yeah.
boring. I tried to learn it once, but it's boring. And are there snacks? No, there's not snacks. So why would I want to go? And
That's
it
actually a misconception, but okay, you can
oh,
continue.
is there snacks? Are there snacks?
There's snacks, there's beer. I'm not a big golfer, but those are the main attractions for me.
I don't drink beer,
Okay.
but if there's snacks, then maybe I'm in. Hadn't thought about that. But it might be a statement of fact, like getting rid of the girl language saying, "Hey, the guys are going golfing, none of the women wanted to come." But and then that might be true because I don't wanna go. I don't wanna go golfing. Other women don't wanna go golfing. Some men don't wanna go golfing. Not everybody likes to golf. But the question is, was it really an invitation? Or is it an assumption that, oh, you girls don't want to do this. This is a manly
Mhm.
thing. And a lot of
You could even make the invitation in a dismissive way.
right.
You don't want to
You
come, do you?
you
Right?
don't, yeah,
Or
you don't come to you. Yeah, the guys, we go golfing every Thursday. You're welcome to come if you want. You know,
yeah,
it can be kind of a problem. And then what if I said yes? Would you treat me differently than the guys? Or would you be like, oh, Suzanne, the HR lady, is coming and she's going to prevent us from telling dirty jokes? But it's one of those things where it can sound innocent enough, and it may be innocent. It may be innocent. Because like I said, maybe the women really didn't want to go and they knew that they were genuinely invited, but maybe not. Maybe it
yeah,
is one of those, oh, yeah, they don't want to come. And this is a guy's thing. And you girls can go do whatever you want to do. And that can be really problematic. I'm not arguing that you should stop having business golf things. It's totally fine. But you do want to make sure that it's not, the backhanded invitation. Oh, you want to come? And that everyone genuinely is welcome to come. And honestly, if I worked for an organization where the leadership liked to golf, then that's on me to learn to golf. I don't buy into this whole everybody needs to change their behavior to make me happy. I don't golf. I can learn to golf. I could. And if it was going to be something that was important to my career, then I should learn to golf. And that's on my head. But on the whoever's sponsoring the golf, they need to be just as welcoming to me or to the other women as they are to the men.
yeah. Okay, those are great observations. Interesting comment about how it's on you to learn how to golf. But I understand your point.
Yeah, I mean, so
If it's going to
often,
advance your career, if it's an obligation for you to play golf, then it might be a different thing, right?
but even if it is an obligation, like if this is how you get ahead,
How business is done in that environment.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing right now, Dell Computer made an announcement that they would allow people to continue working 100% from home. But if you worked 100% from home, then you were no longer eligible for promotions or transfers. And if you wanted to do that, you needed to come into the office at least 39 days in a quarter, which I think worked out to like 3 days a week or something. And one of the complaints was that this would affect women more often than men. Now, there's this whole doctrine in employment law of disparate impact, which this may get your podcast canceled, but I am not a fan of. If the rules are the same for everyone, I can meet and you can meet and whatever. And this is kind of what I feel like here.
Well, thanks for being on the show, Suzanne. That's all the time we have for today. Just kidding, of course.
So more women than men are going to be affected by this because more women want to be at home. But my thing is this, and I say this as someone who started working from home when my oldest child was born in 2003. So I was working from home before it was cool to work from home. Is that you have two employees and one is willing to dedicate their life to Dell and the other one wants to focus on family. It makes sense to me that Dell rewards the one that wants to focus on the career.
Mhm,
And if I
mhm.
want that, then I need to go into the office. And I see so many people complaining that Dell should change it. This is awful. This is terrible. Don't we know we have obligations? We all have obligations. I made an active choice when I had my first baby that I wasn't going to work full time. And I didn't work full time until, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago when my kids were older. That was an active choice, but I don't expect to be like, well, yeah, I should be the chief human resources officer for a Fortune 100 company because I have 20 years of experience. I worked at home part time for 15 years.
Yeah. So here's another one. How old is he? It looks like he just wants to coast to retirement, and we need someone who wants to work. Now, I've heard that sentiment before.
Absolutely. It is something that people say, and it's kind of funny because right now, people don't stay in jobs forever. You're lucky if you can keep someone for 2 or 3 years. And so the concept of, oh, well, he might be looking to retire. Well, the 22-year-old that you hire is going to be moving jobs in less time than the 60-year-old is going to retire. So that's not even a valid type of thing. And people think they're being kind when they're like, "Oh, you're too old for that. Oh, you won't want to do that because you're too old," or blah blah blah. It's not kind, and it's illegal. You can't consider age except for a few rare positions that have age limits. What you can consider is, can the person do the job? Are they the best person for the job? And to make assumptions that because someone is older that they might want something different is illegal, and it's dumb. It also cuts you off from great talent. We have this idea that it's the young people that have new ideas. Well, successful startups are founded by people over 40 because they actually know the market, they know what they're doing, they know how to
Mhm,
run a
mhm.
business. Yes, we hear about, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world who started things when they were very young, but most people that start things very young aren't going to be successful, not because they're bad people or dumb, it's just that they don't have the experience to be able to do it.
Mhm.
And so that gets you into all sorts of age discrimination, but age discrimination aside, it's dumb. It's a bad business move.
It reminds me of a comment I heard early in my career before I went into law. I did a bunch of other things and had gotten married and started a family. And someone once remarked to me, I think it was in a summer associate position. I don't remember the context, but it was sort of the inverse of what you're saying. Like, oh, we know you'll stick around because you need the money because you got kids at home. Make of it what you will, positive, negative. I don't know if it's legal or not, but I found that to be an interesting observation.
From federal law, there's no discrimination. There's family status isn't protected under federal law. So it's fine to prefer people with kids or prefer people without kids under federal law. Some states are different. But what usually happens is they prefer men with kids for that very reason, and don't want women with kids because they assume that women are going to stay home and be the primary parent. And
That's
statistics
interesting.
bear
Yeah.
this out. Men's salaries skyrocket after having their first child, and women's dive. And
Wow.
part of that, you could say it was discrimination, but it really boils down to choice. As I said, when I had my first baby, I started working at home and I switched to part time work. And I was super, super lucky that I had an amazing boss and I worked for an amazing company. And, I had several years there and they knew my skills and so they were just happy to keep me in whatever
That's
way
awesome. Right.
I wanted to do it. But that wasn't even something that crossed my husband's mind. He wasn't like, "Oh, I'm gonna work part-time." It was like, "Oh, holy crap, I have a kid." And he started working much, much harder at that point, and that's really a standard behavior. And as long as we're talking about the impact of kids on careers, I'm going to give some unsolicited advice to your younger female listeners, which is if you want to climb the corporate ladder and you want to have kids sooner rather than later. Because if you can have the kids at the in early career, then you can work straight through without having to take a break. It's really hard to climb up to the director level and then be like, "Oh, I have this baby. I don't wanna put it in daycare 60 hours a week. I wanna pull back." It's hard to pull back from a director level job. It's real easy to pull back from an entry level job. So, if I had it to do over again, I would have preferred to have my kids at 22 rather than 30.
Yeah. Yeah. Suzanne, I really think you're trying to get this podcast canceled. So
I
before that happens,
know. I'm
let
really
me move on to the
sorry.
next one more quote. We don't tolerate discrimination. We have strong policies. Now, this one was counterintuitive to me, but this is from your article too, and I thought you had some interesting observations on this seemingly not only innocuous but seemingly positive comment. We have strong policies about discrimination.
Absolutely. That's great. But anytime someone tells me that they have strong policies, I'm like, "Okay, why are you telling me this?" It's the same thing when someone's like, "Oh, I'm really honest." Okay, honest people don't go around telling people how honest they are. And they did a study actually in right after Black Lives Matter became a big movement and found that companies that changed their website and advertised Black Lives Matter had a lower percentage of Black employees than companies that didn't.
Wow.
So as soon as you're shouting about how great you are, it's generally a sign that you're not great, right? People that do the work just do it. They just do it. We don't allow discrimination here. Yes, you need strong policies, but policies alone don't mean anything. I can make a policy right now that, the kitchen is going to remain clean. And I have 2 teenagers and 2 cats. It's not going to remain clean. It doesn't matter what my policy is. What I need to do is change behavior. And so
Right.
policies alone, they don't mean anything.
Suzanne, let's move on to another topic. In my little outline that I have here, that last section I called how to get sued. This next section I called grab bag. And this is the part I referred to earlier, which now that I have you as a captive expert, this is where I just ask you all the questions that I've had that I've been wanting to ask someone. And I thought, well, why not do it on the podcast and let all of our listeners benefit from it? First one is hot topic in all industries and sectors, AI technology. What impact is AI making on human resources?
Well, this is such an interesting thing because you have, on the one hand, people that are like, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we're going to be able to replace all of these people. We're going to be able to just have AI do our recruiting, and we're going to have AI do interviewing. We're going to have AI provide coaching, blah, blah, blah. And then on the other side, you have people, some of whom are on this very podcast at this moment, who are like, yeah, the problem with AI is that it is incredibly biased because it's built on biases written by humans who are biased. And when you have biases as a human, you can think around them and you can be self aware. And if we go back to the idea of the statistical reality that when men have their first child, their careers take off, and when women have their first child, their careers sink. And you can look into the work of Nobel Prize winner Claudia Golden, who's our HR winner. I mean, she's not technically HR, she's technically economics, but it was all with HR stuff. So I feel like, she got a Nobel
You can
Prize.
claim her.
Great.
You can claim her. Yeah.
Anyway, that's a reality, but that doesn't mean that you are going to be more dedicated to your career after having a baby and I'm going to be less dedicated. It could be the opposite. I have plenty of female executive friends whose husbands were stay-at-home dads. Every person is an individual. But the problem with AI is that it just learns from what's been put in there. So it reads and thinks, okay, well, now she's had her baby, so she's going to go off. Because statistically, that's likely to happen. But from an HR standpoint, I can't consider that. That has to be the employee's choice. And so it's not that AI is evil. It just takes the biases that we all have and magnifies them. And it's not using logic or reasoning and it's not intelligent. It's just putting stuff together, these large language models, with ChatGPT being the most famous of them. It's just putting words together that other people have put together. It's not really thinking of anything. And so we see all these types of bias coming up, and there's bias in so much that it's hard for us to fathom and to predict it. And because the models are constantly changing, you could do checking and studying and all this to make sure that it's okay today, but then it won't be okay next week. And that's a huge problem.
Boy, you said so many interesting things in there. I, I can tell you that I've been experimenting a lot and using ChatGPT and other AI applications. And the experience I've had, I suspect a lot of people have had. My first experience with it was, this is amazing. This is miraculous. It's unbelievable what this stuff can do. And it is. But after a little while, you realize, oh, this technology is really stupid too. It's just
Yeah,
better at masking its stupidity and making it sound like intelligence.
right. And what I like to call it a high school senior. It is convinced it knows everything, but it doesn't have the experience and wisdom to know when it's wrong or to
Yeah.
make practical applications. But it's very insistent that it's right.
Yeah. It writes like a high school senior too, with like these 5 sentence paragraphs, starting with ever since the dawn of time and making kind of, bland anodyne comments. And, um,
Exactly. And there's some things that it's really, really great at. It's really great to give you an outline for something. It gives great
absolutely.
outline. If you want to brainstorm some things, it's really helpful with that type of
Absolutely.
stuff. But you can't trust any of the information that comes out of it. And even, for example, ChatGPT is based on old data, but Google's version, which is now called Gemini, it used to be called Bard, it supposedly is looking at the whole internet as a whole. But last summer, July 2023, a new law went into effect, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And so if you go into ChatGPT and say, what laws cover breastfeeding mothers in the workplace, it's not going to bring up the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act because that law didn't exist
Yeah.
on the data that it's using. So it's fine. I know that
But
there's a
it
new
will
law.
give you an answer and it'll say it with absolute confidence and sound very convincing. And it might even
Exactly.
make up
So
a citation to a law that doesn't exist.
yeah, it gives your intern this feeling like she knows what she's talking about, but it's wrong. Or even if the information is accurate, it's old, so it's not up to date. Gemini does do a little bit better, but it still takes about 6 months for there to be enough information on the internet for it to start to incorporate because what it does is it looks at what people are talking about. So most of the information on the internet about breastfeeding at work is based on the older laws because the new law is new. And so
Right.
if you're not up to date yourself, then it can really lead you down the wrong path.
Another very topical issue in the last several years since COVID, remote work. How has not just the pandemic, we've all talked about the pandemic to death, but I mean, the legacy of the pandemic is that we're doing a lot of things remotely. Here, you and I are doing this podcast remotely. And a lot of people are working remotely and expecting to work remotely. How does that impact the HR person's role and what legal dimensions are there to that?
Well, first of all, there's a bunch of legal things to it. And you see like these TikTokers talking about how terrible their bosses are when they get mad that they're not working at home. They're working at the beach or in Barcelona or whatever. They're like, I'm doing my work. Why does it matter? Well, it turns out that there are laws surrounding employment. And chances of an American citizen being legal to work in Spain are pretty slim. Now, the reality is nobody cares if you're there for a week. Nobody cares. Spain doesn't care. The United States doesn't care. Nobody cares, right? Technically, you couldn't do it, but people do it all the time and business trips all the time. I speak at a lot of conferences in a variety of countries, and I just go and I speak and they pay me, and I'm not authorized to work in that country.
Right. But
Nobody
it's de
cares.
minimis. So nobody cares.
Nobody cares. But if you're going for a month or 2 months or 3 months, yeah, people care. And the business needs to be registered in that country. And if you're like, "Well, I'm just going to New Jersey." Well, if your business isn't registered in New Jersey, then you can't be an employee there. And also, different employment laws apply to you. Laws the employment laws that you are subject to are the laws of where you work. So if I have on the record that you're working from home and you live in Texas, which I'm guessing from the Texas on your wall. Um,
Actually, well, if I lean over, you'll see there's Michigan on my wall too.
oh,
I
the
work in Michigan now, but I am licensed in both states and have worked in
well,
both
there you go.
states.
So, but okay, so you're in Michigan. I assume as your
What
boss
if I
that you're
fly to
working.
Texas and do some work down there, right?
You should work in Texas in the winter and Michigan in the summer, in case you hadn't
Yeah,
thought
you
about
got
that.
that right. It usually seems to work out the other way, but
Isn't that how life goes? Um, but let's just say you decide, oh, you know what? You know what's so much better place? California. And you don't tell your boss and you just go off to California. Well, California's got all sorts of crazy laws that protect employees. It's a really employee friendly state. One of which is that when you quit, they have to provide your last paycheck within a very short period of time. You're now subject to that law. I don't know if you're there. And now I'm in trouble for not giving you your last
Yeah.
paycheck.
Yeah.
And 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 that's a huge problem. And there's lots of things like that. And just the fact that the business isn't registered there. So it's not HR being cruel and heartless when we say, if you're going to work from home, we need to know where you're working. And for the most part, de minimis work here or there, someplace else, no one cares about. Mm. But if you're going to be longer than a week somewhere, yeah. And as much as people think that they can do whatever at the beach, I've been to the beach, man. Are you really sitting at your desk from 9 to 5? I mean, I am because I don't like getting wet, but normal humans are going to want to be out playing in the water. They're like, well, if I get my work done, yeah, if you get your work done, but we're paying you also to be available when we need
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
And so that can have that kind of problem. And the other thing, which we talked about earlier with Dell, and this is true with other things as well, there are benefits to working with other people. And if I'm working with you on a daily basis and I can see you, I learn a lot more about you. When we work remotely, we're all very siloed. I don't contact you unless I need to work with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if I'm the senior vice president and you are the new guy, the chances of me talking to you in a remote environment are very slim. But if we're all wandering down the hallway together, I'm going to know your name, where you from, what you're doing. Oh, welcome to the company. And you may overhear me talking about something and you're like, oh, hey. And you jump in and you build these relationships. It's this networking thing that we all know is important. And the people that are home may be just as smart, but they don't get that advantage
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
of that. And
They're missing out. Right.
they're missing out. And so I'm not opposed to remote work. I mean, as I said, I was remote working before it was cool. But when I started doing remote work, I had been in that job for 3 years. I knew everybody and I purposely stepped down. I was managing a group and I stepped down to an individual contributor role so that I could work from home. But I already had built those relationships. When you haven't built those relationships, it's much harder.
Right. For sure. For sure. That's a conversation I've had on many occasions. The argument on the other side is, well, look, we have these video calls, we have a phone, you have messaging, you have texting, you have all the access you want to another person. My answer is always that, right, I can avail myself of those things, but I won't, and neither will you. It's just observe how people actually behave. Yes, I can, but I won't.
Exactly. And the other thing is that if I say, okay, so we're just going to have one big Zoom call with the whole company on it and everybody's on all the time. No, nobody wants that.
Right.
If
The,
you're
a Zoom
watching,
hallway, right? A Zoom water cooler. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's another thing is that when you know the people that you work with, you're much more compassionate towards them when they need help. And the other thing is that we all have this idea that everybody else's job is easy. Our jobs are hard and everybody else's job is easy. And when you're separated from other people and you really can't see any of their process, it makes that division even greater. That yes, all he has to do is, review some document, whatever. He's a
Yeah.
lawyer. That's what you do.
Yeah.
You review document. And then when you go to court, I know because I watched The Lincoln Lawyer. All you have to do is like say
Very
something. The
true to
judge
life.
just says, rein it in. That's all it is.
And then you
To-
win big. Yeah.
You're pushing the limit. I'm ready to be a judge.
It's very, yeah, you are. You are. It's very true to life. One more grab bag topic, non-competes. Perennial topic, but another hot topic lately because there's a lot of legal changes afoot, both at the federal and the state level.
There's a lot of changes afoot. The FTC announced last year, end of 2022. I don't remember.
Yeah, it was last year, beginning of 2023. Three,
2023.
maybe it was 22, but right, yeah, that they were going to crack down.
They were going to crack down, and that really didn't happen. But a lot of states' non-competes are just worthless, California being one. And this is something that I feel like with non-competes, back in the old days, I could give you a non-compete and it would be like, you can't work for any company that does similar work within a 50-mile radius. And that was fine, right? Because that was a limited area. But now, I mean, you're sitting in Michigan, I'm sitting in Switzerland, we're having a conversation. And so how can you limit me and not affect your business? Because things are much more global. And so the 50-mile radius doesn't really make a lot of sense for a lot of companies. And of course, a lot of companies went completely overboard with non-competes. And you had like Jimmy John's saying you
Right.
can't work for any other company that sells sandwiches.
Right,
Like,
because it's a secret that we put the meat on and then the cheese, and we don't want to let any of our competitors to know because they put the cheese on first and then the meat.
right, exactly. And it's a huge, huge problem, which is also why you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement anytime you eat there because you see them making the sandwich, right? But, and when businesses start to push on things like that, that's when politicians wake up and then they start making rules that are worse
Yep.
than what they want.
That's when the FTC comes in and says we're going to abolish them
We're going to
in all
abolish
50
them.
states.
And right now, non-competes are basically unenforceable in a lot of states. And they really should be. I think more to protect you or stuff is more non-disclosure than non-compete. But again, what intellectual property are you trying to keep from me? People are so loudmouthed about what they do that a lot of the trade secrets I can find on their web pages.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That happens a lot. I see that in litigation. It's a tactic I've used in litigation. Oh, these purported trade secrets, here they are. Your customer list is a secret? Then why are you telling the world, touting all these customers that you serve? Time
Exactly.
and again. Time and again. You see that all the time.
Yeah, here's your list on your webpage. I mean, heck, in my improv comedy team, we do training and corporate events. And so if you go to our webpage, you'll see the logos from all the companies that we've done training at.
Yeah.
You can just steal my list right there. Woo!
Well, the phrase, this is why we can't have nice things, comes to
Exactly.
mind. My own view is a non-compete agreement is a perfectly valid tool that makes sense in many circumstances. But because of infamous examples like Jimmy John's or these companies who try to claim every scrap of information is a secret, even the stuff that they themselves are proclaiming on their websites, that's what attracts the interest of state attorneys general, of the FTC. The NLRB is in on the act. Now, it attracts the attention of politicians, and then we often end up with stupider laws than we had before.
Well, exactly. Because, and this may be shocking to you, but our politicians are not that bright. And they make laws that are dumb and it's our own darn fault because we elect them and because smart people refuse to run for office.
They're too smart to run for office.
Well, that's the thing. I don't want to run for office.
Suzanne, you've probably had people ask you what you do all day as an HR person. Well, I know one thing you do all day is fire people. You mentioned earlier that scenario where the employee walks into a room and their heart drops when they see the HR person sitting there with their supervisor. We all know what that means. So what's something that you could tell employers to help them make a clean break in a termination scenario?
Well, the first rule that you need to remember as an employer is your goal in terminating someone is to get them to go away and never bother you again. Whether that is a termination for cause, a termination for poor performance, or a layoff for whatever reason you're laying off, a reduction in force. Now, theoretically, people that are laying off as part of a layoff, you may want to see again, but you want them to only see you when they're happy. Other ones, your goal is to get them to go away and leave you alone. And the best way to get people to go away and leave you alone is to set them up for success. And so I see so many businesses fighting unemployment tooth and nail, or
Mhm.
trying to force people to resign so that they can say it was a resignation and not a termination, and therefore they aren't eligible for unemployment. Just give them, I mean, you don't have to lie. Just when the unemployment office sends you those little forms, just say we're not contesting, and let them have it. And they're like, "Oh no, Suzanne, but our rates will go up." Okay, but you
How
know
much is
where
it gonna cost you when that employee sues you? Or
when
when you
that
have to
employee
go and do
sues you,
or a
and
contested unemployment proceeding, right? Yeah.
exactly, just let it go. Just let it go. Give the person the things that they need to succeed. I have terminated quite a few people in my day. We made sure that they had information on how to apply for unemployment. In some states, that's the law. Because we were laying people off and we were big pharma, we gave outplacement services. That's not practical for a lot of businesses because they're incredibly expensive. But big pharma certainly could do that. You can help people move on. And if you can help them
What a
move on,
concept.
then they go away and they don't bother you anymore. And that is what you want when you terminate someone. If you are like, I'm going to withhold your last paycheck until you return that equipment, and I'm going to, well, first of all, you can't withhold their last paycheck, but people do it anyway. And I'm going to fight you on unemployment, and I'm going to give you a bad reference. I mean, don't lie in references, but just confirm dates. Just, that's it.
Yeah.
They work for me from here to here.
Mhm.
References are dumb. Anyway, but
Yes, it's so much of life. Be nice.
just
Be
be
nice.
nice. Just be nice. And it makes your terminations go much more smoothly. And just today on Twitter, actually, I saw one of my editors for Comstocks magazine, who I work with. She talked about how she was laid off from a job that she'd had for 20 years, not Comstock. She's still there. Hallelujah. And she had it for 20 years. She was laid off. It wasn't a termination for cause. And they immediately walked her to her car and let her pack her own stuff. In a layoff situation, unless you have a legitimate fear that they're going to pull a gun or something, let them go get their stuff. Let them say goodbye to their employees. It just gave to their coworkers. It just gave a bitter taste in her mouth. She'd given 20 years to this company and they wouldn't even
Yeah.
let her clean at her own desk.
Wow.
It's just,
Wow.
there's this panic. I have been involved in the layoff of about 4,000 people. We always had security aware. We never did a layoff without notifying security, just in case. And if there was somebody we were really concerned about, we would make a plan with security. And that I never had a single problem with someone causing a huge problem on the notification with 4,000 people over several years. It's a rare occurrence. Don't treat your terminated employees poorly. Now, when you're terminating for cause, it can be a completely different situation, which may be more volatile, and there may be good reasons to walk that person out. I'm not saying there's not good reasons to walk people out at all the times, but remember what your primary goal is: to get them to go away and not bother you again.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, excellent advice. Not legal advice, of course, but it's excellent advice all the same. This has been a really great discussion. I'd love to have you back on again. I feel like we just scratched the surface. Suzanne, where can listeners learn more about you and your evil ways?
You can find me at evilhrlady.org or at hrlearns.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. It's just Suzanne Lucas. And I'm the Suzanne Lucas who is not a midwife. There is a Suzanne Lucas who is a midwife on LinkedIn, but I'm not her. So if you're in labor, don't contact me. I am not helpful.
And I can confirm you're an excellent LinkedIn follow. I love your
Oh,
posts.
well, thank you.
So, yeah. Well, okay. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate your making time for this. Thanks for sharing your insights on the litigation war room.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have been listening to the Litigation War Room with litigation attorney Maxwell Goss. Maxwell Goss brings forceful advocacy and creative solutions to trade secret, IP, and business cases in Michigan and around the country. For show notes and more episodes, please visit us at thelitigationwarroom.com. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. The Litigation War Room, including the podcast and all website content and social media, is for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide legal advice and does not give rise to an attorney-client relationship. All views and opinions expressed on this podcast belong to the guests expressing them and do not reflect the views and opinions of the Litigation War Room.